So we may start.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second panel during the second session of the second ESFRI Research Infrastructure EOS Workshop titled Research Infrastructures Shaping EOSC. It's on the first day of the workshop, so that's one number that it's not equal to 2. But welcome to the session that is titled Updates on the Latest Technical Developments. During the morning, we got off to a great start where we were informed about what is the status of the EOSC, the formation of the EOSC Association, EOSC governance, issues of policies, and how the ESFRI research infrastructures and other research infrastructures are participating, are engaging into the developments, the partnership, the strategic agenda, how they're involved in preparing themselves for EOSC or shaping the priorities and the actions that are to come in the direction. And there were lots of interesting discussions, both interesting presentations and also at the breakouts. So governance, people, policies, strategies, this was the first session. And now we change pace and we're going down to technical developments. EOSC needs to be built, is being built, parts of it have been built. What are the issues? What are the main elements that are shaping this technological development and how these are interacting with the corresponding ESFRI technologies? In this session, we're very lucky and great to have 4 of the 6 working groups that EOSC has set up, to have chairs of these 4 working groups to update us on the latest developments on technology. We have, I'll be presenting each one as they come. So we will talk about the architecture of the overall system. This is a very complex system. And what is the first version, if you want, EOSC 1.0 or the minimum viable EOSC MVE that we'll be hearing from Jean-Francois, who is chair of the architecture working group and a senior scientist emeritus at INRIA. And then we'll go into the data, which is let's say the primary motivation for building EOSC. Of course, data in the more general sense. And we'll see about the FAIR+R plus reproducible data and services and open science policies that come with it. And Francoise Genova, who is the co-chair of the FAIR working group of EOSC, and from CNRS will be chairing, will be giving us the presentation. And then rules of participation. How can you participate in EOSC? What are the rules behind it? And Juan Bicarregui from the rules of participation working group of EOSC as the chair will be giving us a presentation. And of course, he's at STFC, he's head of the data division, and also very much involved with the Research Data Alliance. And we'll be closing the list of presentations with Natalia Manola, who is chair of the Skills and Training Working Group of EOSC, and she is the managing director of OpenAir. So we're looking forward to exciting 10 minutes presentation each for the latest technical developments, each in its own part. So let's, without any further ado, Jean-Francois Abramatic will tell us about architecture MVE. Jean-Francois.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Great.
Okay. For some reason, okay, anyway. All right, and connection is very poor, and therefore, well, good afternoon to all of you. And I start by apologizing. So the slides, my is very poor. I'm talking over the phone, not over the internet, and the slides presented by the organizers. I don't know who in the organization. At the moment, do you see slide 1?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Now you're breaking up,
yeah.
Jean-Francois. We cannot hear you.
I cannot do anything. I'm talking on the phone. Hold on.
Now it's better, so keep going and hopefully we got it.
Is it better this way?
Oh, yes.
Is it better? Is it
Yes,
better
yes.
this way?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I will present a few elements of the architecture, and of course, we'll not go into any details in the 10 minutes. So if we move to slide 2, to put things in perspective, the EOSC will be a federation of infrastructure. It's not yet another infrastructure, it's a federation of infrastructure. So all the participants in this workshop are candidate and very much welcome to become participant of EOSC. And EOSC will be the sum of all of us. It's not, you know, the outcome of a small team. So the challenge from the architecture point of view is to consider that, of course, infrastructure exists. They're very different from each other. They have very different purposes. They are installed in very different ways. And the challenge of EOSC and the architecture in particular is to federate those infrastructures so that users can benefit from the sum of the infrastructure offering rather than the single one that they are affiliated with. So again, EOSC does not exist as such. It is federating existing infrastructure, federating the infrastructures that you represent, you, the participants in this workshop. Slide 3, please. So let me introduce a few terms and also the focus of this presentation. So the EOSC grand infrastructure is briefly described in this diagram, where you have, and let me introduce the first, the 3 terms that we need to agree in order to move forward. So first, the EOS Core. You see, this is the little circle in the middle of the diagram. It's the minimum architecture element to enable the federation, right? So it's, as said, EOS could be a federation in infrastructure. In order to federate, you need to share something. And the core is the minimum architecture element. We want this core to be as small as possible. This will be my conclusion. But still, it cannot be 0, right? So that's the first element, EOS Core. EOS Exchange is the opposite. The sky is the limit. It's the evolving federation. It's the value delivered by EOS connected to the federated infrastructure and ultimately to the research and innovation community using the infrastructure. So EOS Exchange is evolving by definition as time goes by. There'll be more and more services available. More and more needs from the research community will be served, even eventually moving to the general public and the private sector at some point in time. So that's the first definition, EOS Core and EOS Exchange. And then the minimum viable EOS is the minimum federation that starts to bring value to users. right? And this presentation will focus on the green part of this diagram, the blue part being the ultimate EOS that we all dream of, right? But we will focus at this moment in time on the green part of this diagram. Can we move to slide 4? So what's the minimum viable EOS? First of all, the minimum viable EOS, the same way we define, in general, the minimum viable product, is something that brings value to the users. In the case of minimum viable product, to the point that they would buy it. In the case of minimum viable EOS, it brings value to users beyond their current use of infrastructures, right? It's the same people will use infrastructures, but what is it that EOS can bring that will bring value, and people will say, okay, not only I get access to the infrastructure that I've been getting access to for a long time, but now I have something more by the fact that infrastructure are federated and that EOS exists. So that's the key point. The MVE must bring value to users beyond the current use. Second is, of course, it's the first iteration, so it includes the initial EOS Core and EOS Exchange, so that the elements that that makes it, following the architecture I presented in previous slide, that makes it a federation of infrastructure which is starting to bring value. So there is an initial. So initial suggests that there is a time going on where, of course, both EOS Core and EOS Exchange will develop and improve and provide even more value to users. The design of the MVE has to be such that it enables the federation of existing, of course, and future resource infrastructure. So the choices need to be generic enough that not only it delivers the value immediately, but it has the power to deliver more as more infrastructure get embedded or get engaged into the federation that EOS gives. And ultimately, the MVE will enable cross-disciplinary research when there is enough research infrastructure connected to allow for this cross-disciplinary work. So this is the definition of the MVE. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a talk about architecture, so I have to provide a few elements without going into the details, provide a few elements. First, of course, the minimum viable EOS has to have in its genes the first two key elements of EOS, which are openness, like the O of open science suggests, and FAIR, that will be described further in the next sessions, but you're all aware of. Now, the elements of the EOS interoperability framework, and I want to stop here, EOS interoperability framework, the essential part of what EOS brings is interoperability, right? This interoperability is declined into a number of frameworks. First, the AI that allows to authenticate and authorize users, and there is a specific task force in the architecture working group that works on AI. Documents will be published and shared, so people interested in this aspect will be able to get into the details of what's going on in AI. Similarly, on the persistent identifier, so now it's the idea of being able to identify any digital object within the infrastructures, need to have a persistent identifier. Similarly, there's been already a PID policy document that has been shared widely, and now there will be a PID architecture document which will be shared, both of them, the AI and PID, will be shared in 2 weeks during the EOS symposium. The third element of the interoperability framework is a metadata framework that will allow interoperability within and between disciplines. Of course, data, as was said earlier, although it's data in general, publication data and software, but data access needs to cannot be just thrown to users without embedding them into a service. So there need to be services allowing the data access. Service management access framework define what services are available, how they are delivered, and who does them, and who has access to those services. And metrics framework, including rewards and recognition, meaning this metrics will of course be useful for managers of infrastructures and so forth, but should go as far as providing ways to reward and recognize the effort of any stakeholder in the process. And finally, of course, a support framework, help desk, website to provide whatever information is necessary. So that's we suggest is the minimum viable EOSC. And in the breakout session coming up in architecture, the core of the breakout session will be whether this is, you estimate that this is sufficient. Are there any missing pieces, or are there things that should not be there? Next slide, please.
One more minute, Jean-Francois.
Okay, thank you. Now, after having the 2 slides on the MVE, now 2 slides on the core. So the little circle in the middle of the diagram earlier. So the core has to provide, this is extracted from the Iron Lady document, which was presented this morning, has to provide mechanism for naming and locating data and services, mechanism for discovery of and access to data and services, common framework for managing user identity. These are the roles of the EOS Core in the architecture. Next slide, please. And finally, I mentioned it at the beginning, and I repeat it now. The core has to be as small as possible, as enabling as necessary, right? So the initial versions of the core will be delivered by H2020 projects that are going on as we speak. They will enable the 3 elements that were mentioned earlier: naming and locating, discovery and access, managing identity. They will be based on open standards, open source and open APIs. The core should be shared no matter what, and it will comply with and instantiate the EOS Interoperability framework. And I conclude by this diagram that reminds everybody that interoperability is not only technical. Architecture, of course, is focusing on the lower layer, technical, and contributing to the semantic interoperability. But there are other layers that are part of the EOS interoperability framework when it comes to interaction cross-border or cross-infrastructure exchanges, cross-borders or cross-infrastructures. So this, in 10 minutes, is a very high-level view of what's going on in architecture. Thank you.
Excellent, Jean-Francois. Thank you very much for this really on-target presentation of how we are advancing in architecture. And before going on to the next presentation, I want to remind you something that that has been said in the first session, that you can be, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can pose questions, and then some of them can be answered during the presentations by some of the panelists, while others, we have a 10 to 15 minute part at the end of the session before the breakout sessions, where the panelists will answer your questions. So please go ahead and use that feature. And not only that, at the end, please do fill out the questionnaire with all about all the breakout sessions, that you'll find it in the workshop page. So please don't forget question and answers now, and the questionnaire at the end. So moving along, second presentation by Francoise Genova on FAIR+R data and services open science policies. Francoise.
Yes, thank you. You hear me, I guess, I hope.
Yes, very well.
Thank you. So this is a short presentation of what is going on in the FAIR working group of the EOSC Executive Board. So we have set up task force because we are tasked to provide several documents with recommendations. And in addition to the task force dealing with the topics we were tasked with, we thought it was extremely useful or absolutely needed to have a task force to examine fair practices. This morning, Sarah said that in the Shreya, there are concerns about how the communities are taken care of and so on. This means it doesn't work if you don't see my slides, my second slide. Do you see my second slide?
Yes.
Okay, so it's okay. So we thought that it was very important to have an idea of what is really going on in the real world. And so we set up a task force which is aiming at understanding the fair practices and analyzing the fair practices, the ongoing fair practices. So they finalized their report. The draft report was submitted for comments, and there were many, as you can see, more than 600 downloads. And many comments also. So they took the comments into account and they finalized the report, which is being typeset for publication before the EOSC symposium. So they have 6 recommendations. 3 of them are about how to support community and incentivize them to do things like having community governance for defining standards and fair practices. There is also something which was discussed this morning about the need to take into account software source code and also other kinds of digital objects, and there are things which are written about it in the report. There is also something about incentives and policies for to develop and monitor policies for fair data sets and research objects. So the second task force was about PID policy. It is shared with the architecture working group, and this is why Jean-Francois just talked about it. The first step in the work of the working groups about PIDs is to have a PID policy, and the PID policy is finalized. They got 2,000 downloads and hundreds of comments, and they examine many different aspects of the PID policies, which are listed on the slide here. It's very interesting because all what we do when we share research data is, of course, international. And one of the comments received about the PID policy document came from colleagues from Australia, from the Australian Research Data Commons, and they say that they fully agree. They want to cover, and they are enthusiastic to see the outcomes of the PID policy, EOSC PID policy, and interested in collaboration. The third task force, I am one of the co-chairs of that one. It's about metrics and certification. We had the very first draft published at the beginning of this year, and we are preparing the second draft. In this case, there are many activities ongoing in different venues, including in the RDA and in FAIR+R. And the idea was not to redo the work, but to take the work into account and to have a view on what is proposed about these topics with EOSC in mind. So one of the things which is getting out of a Shreya is that this kind of things has much less support than the other top things. And people think that, sorry, it's not 75%, I think it was much less than that. And it's a typo, sorry. So it has, you have the values in Sarah's points, in Sarah's slides this morning. People think it has to be done at a later stage. And it's very clear that people have deep concerns about this kind of activities because the concerns are people could be excluded, disciplines and activities could be excluded from the EOSC if there are pass and fail measurements of metrics or if certification is used as a pass and fail mechanism. So Sarah already said that this morning, but we deeply think that inclusiveness is one of the key keywords of the EOSC. And to say the truth, we share the concerns expressed during the consultation. So we will do all what we can to have the recommendations taking into account these concerns and also, of course, our own concerns. So metrics, we will recommend a subset of RDA metrics, and the recommendation coming with a list will be that this has to be thoroughly tested in a wide variety of contexts and disciplines, because we want to see if they are applicable and acceptable. And we also stage them along the years to have a progress, to be able to measure progress and to have progress implemented in the infrastructures and in all the places which will provide fair data and services. We also deal with metrics for software here, although it's far less advanced than for data, of course. Then the last and not least task force is about interoperability, which is also shared with the colleagues from the architecture working group. They share the document for comments. They examine 4 aspects of interoperability: legal, organizational, semantic, and technical aspects of interoperability. The co-creation funds allowed to have a legal interoperability study, and they are adding content from the study in the document. They are developing a model of a main architectural building block using the European Interoperability Reference Architecture. There were also many comments on that part of the SRIA document, of the SRIA consultation, let's say, and they are working on responding to the comments. And they are also summarizing work on generic standards for discoverability and liaising with FAIR+R. So I go to the questions, but I have a few overarching comments to finish with. I hope I convince you, and it's a deep truth, that we recognize the central role of community as both data and service providers and as users of the system. We have created this task force on fair practices to inform the working group work, and we will use their recommendations and their analysis of the practices. Another of the important or key comment is that FAIR is a journey. We know that EOSC will federate data and services which will be new, but as was already explained, a lot of existing data and services will have to be federated in the EOSC. So we see that EOSC will build up progressively, and we have to expect and to enable gradual uptake, again, with inclusiveness in mind all the time. One of the things we know about the ESFRIs, for instance, is that they are funded to serve their communities, and they may need additional resources to interface with the EOSC. So the overhead has to be minimal, and also they have to have enough time to do the job properly. There is another thing which will be a continuous process.
You're out of time.
Okay. So just to say that the definition of metrics has to be a continuous process, and they will have to be checked deeply and regularly assessed and updated. And we discussed with the community the governance of metrics, and we think that there is a need for a neutral body with participation of EOSC and its stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francoise. Moving along without any further ado, rules of participation. Juan, you have the floor.
Hello. I think Francoise has to stop sharing.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. I'll share my screen like this, I hope. So I'll just briefly talk to you about the status of the rules of participation, and I'm going to focus on what we're trying to achieve, the process we've gone through to get here, and from now forward. I need to give a little bit of terminology so that you can understand the rules, and then I'm going to actually quote some of the rules in their current version. So the aims of the group are to define the rights, obligations, and accountability that will govern transactions on the EOSC. And in doing that, we want to balance the ease of uptake so that it's easy to participate in EOSC, either as a user or as a provider. Balance that against quality assurance so that you know if you're using EOSC, you have some level of quality over and above what you might get if you are just using the internet and your search engines, etc. With respect to the quality, the idea is that we're going to make that through transparency, so it's easy to assess what it is that you're getting rather than enforcing it. The reason behind that is that something that is really unique and novel and doing something new might be very valuable, even if the quality of the data or whatever it is quite low. Whereas something more established, maybe the quality is the important differentiator between different providers. We take to heart the principle of transparency in everything we do. The O in EOSC is very important in all aspects of the work, I think. So we want to be as transparent as possible everywhere. And we'll focus initially on a minimal set of rules of participation. And as I said, then through certification, badges, quality metrics, etc., be able to build up on that. So the rules themselves are deliberately very short and very abstract. There are two reasons for this, or several reasons for this. One is for longevity. We imagine that the rules won't be changed very often. Another is that the different resources provided through EOSC will really need different kinds of rules because they are so different. So we leave the implementation or interpretation of the rules for specific types of resources as a further level of detail that will be provided by those resources. And there are rules about making sure that in doing that you don't close things off. But alongside these very brief and abstract rules, we will produce a commentary on the rules where the issues behind them will be discussed. It's worth saying that some of these have led to a lot of discussion within the working group as part of the consultation we had. So it is quite important that we can't yet fix on some issues, and we'll just leave them open as issues to be fixed in the future. We're also assuming that the governance will be in place so that the rules can be maintained and compliance monitored and possibly enforced where appropriate as time goes on. And that governance will be in the hands of the EOSC Association. We're working with a sustainability working group to define that. The process that we've gone through so far, at the end of last year, we had a first version of the rules which went to the executive board and the governing board. And then in the early part of this year, we put those rules out to open consultation. And we received that sort of by April of this year. During the summer, we've been doing two things. One, writing the rules of participation part of the SRIA, and the other is doing work within the group, restructuring the rules a bit and adapting them in view of the feedback. It's interesting to note that we can't meet all the feedback because some of it was contradictory. So that shows that will be discussed in the commentary document. We're currently about to bring out a new version of rules into the public, which will be ready in time for the EOS Symposium at the the 19th. I think the session on ROP is on the 22nd. And so there again, we will be having the discussion with the community and seeing if we are homing in on the right rules. The plan from then onwards is to finish the work of the working group by December, which is when the mandate for the working group ends, and hand over the final version of the rules from the working group to the EOSC Association at the end of this year, along with the SRIA and multi-annual roadmap. That, of course, is not the end. We imagine then that the EOSC Association will take hold of the rules, will manage their evolution and put in place the monitoring mechanisms. So a little bit of terminology, just so that you can understand what we mean in the rules, because quite often we found that a lot of the discussion is actually around terminology rather than the principle behind the rules. The EOSC itself, here we're talking about the EOSC and the users of the EOSC and the people and all the funders and everyone. So it's not just about the infrastructure in this context, which it is in some other documents, of course. EOSC resources are the things that are available through EOSC, for example, data sets, services, training materials, or software, whatever it happens to be. EOSC participants are the users and providers of the EOSC resources. And I think obviously the users are the users of the resources and the providers are the providers of the resources. We use the phrase EOS recognized in the rules, and this is actually defined in one of the rules. It means that something is registered with EOSC in a, for example, if it's a data set or if it's a service or a catalog itself, it's registered as in an EOS catalog of something. And those catalogs are themselves registered. Okay, so moving on to the rules. In this version, I've abstracted a bit. There are 10 rules. All the best sets of rules come in groups of 10, I believe. And here we have the first one. EOSC is open to all. Interestingly, that has a lot of discussion behind it. It's open. It's as open as possible and as close as necessary. And this applies both to the resources in EOSC and to the participants, so the users and providers. It's not necessarily the case that exactly the same conditions apply to use for all the different resources and for all the different participants, but there is no bar from use in the rules. Now, the second one, that EOS resources are registered in an EOS recognized catalog, is really a definition. EOSC is a system on the internet, and somehow you have to draw a boundary around those things that are part of EOSC and those that are not. And this rule, which is, as I say, a definition, is a way of drawing the boundary. Things are in EOSC if they're registered, and they're not part of EOSC if they're not registered. Obviously, there's quite a lot of implementation work that has to go on behind the scenes to implement that rule.
Juan, you have 1 minute.
Okay, EOS participants adhere to the principles of proper research conduct and to these rules themselves. They agree, as being part of EOSC, to be monitored and analyzed so that we can measure quality. We do that through transparency, as I said, rather than enforcement, and that it's all subject to the policy of the EU. And then my last slide, the users adhere to the terms of use of the resources they use. This is really very important. This is saying that resource providers can provide their own terms and conditions behind their resources. Those terms and conditions would be checked that they don't break any of the openness principles in EOSC, that they can be more stringent terms and conditions on particular resources than there are on others. Users will reference the source of the work. Resources are freely discoverable is a policy statement. Behind it, there's a lot of different discussion about exactly when charges can apply for which kind of resource and how those resources are compensated for any additional work. And then 2 rules that basically say that the data and the services will align with the principles developed under FAIR for the data and after architecture and interoperability for the services. So those, as I say, 10 abstract rules that govern the overall quality of EOS that will then lead implementing and interpreting for specific resources and specific collections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. And last but not least, Natalia.
Yes, hello. Let me try to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, both.
Okay. Okay, so I will present the work that we're doing in skills and training, where I'm co-chairing with Vincent Gillard from European University Association. The work that we are doing has two major pillars. One is on skills and the other is on training. So it's about what kind of competencies and what kinds of capabilities can we think of EOS as an enabler, a facilitator, and where we can intervene. I will just go very briefly on this 4 task forces and the work that we have divided across them. The first task force is on EOS skill set. So what kind of skills do we envision in EOS? Second is what are the competence centers, the digital competence centers we are discussing, and seems like many organizations are setting up. So what are the different options? Third, the task force is looking into EOS within the national strategies for digital skills, and I will explain a bit more. And then the fourth is a bit more concrete about specification for training catalogs. Let me do that. So, going over the first one, many of you have seen this diagram. The task force has tried to identify the various actors around EOS in the different layers. So starting from setting up services, sharing data, preserving data, curating data, publishing data, scholarly communication. So I will not go into the detail because this requires quite an extensive, not just the 10 minutes, but quite an extensive time. But you can see that we have identified various actors. What one of the messages that the group wants to convey is that here EOS, this skill set, what we have found out from our 45 group members is that EOS presents a 360 view of skills on data, on open science, but also on ICT and software. So we see all these skill sets that are valuable in order for us to have this, the minimum viable EOS, the EOS exchange, the EOS core. The first draft, the team is now working on the first draft and is comparing with other frameworks. I isolated some of the key points. So it's about understanding and applying FAIR principles. So this application of FAIR principle is a lot, requires a lot of skills. So about research data management, the knowledge of infrastructures. We're talking about data publication and preservation, both from the scientific point of view and the organizational. Open science, including legal ethics and communication issues, data science, data analytics, and the ICT or overlapping with ICT and data is how to deploy and maintain the EOS core and exchange services related to compliance to EOS and the rules of participation. Which I gather as we go along, they will become more technical, and of course is how can we allow innovation within EOS and how can we have skills in order to design the next generation of discipline-specific services, and this is where I think our eyes come very strongly onto this. About the second task force, about the competence centers. So the scope is to have the organizational models for the training and skills elements of competence centers. And when we're talking competence centers, what we have found is that many people have different ideas in mind. We put here the emphasis on plural because we believe that there will be competence centers at levels of research infrastructures, thematic, national and institutional, more horizontal. So the idea here is competence centers covering digital skills and covering aspects of the diagram that we presented, that it was presented 2 slides ago. It's not going to be a centralized one body, but we believe that there should be coordination or alignment, and what level of coordination, and a federation of competence centers. And also what this group is going to do now is about what are the organizational models. So what are the functions, what are the roles, and what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what are the emerging models. We believe that we will have a blueprint of this. There are ongoing interviews. So the research infrastructures, I think we cover some of them, but if you feel that that you would like to be interviewed, just let us know. Then we have started a study on national. So this is the National Strategy Task Force, a study on the national strategy for digital skills. So what we see happening in Europe, just to give you a bit of context, is that many member states and many ministries, not necessarily only the science and technology, but many ministries are rethinking and of workforce digital reskilling. So where does EOSC fit into this picture? The work that we have, that we are doing through a co-creation budget from EOS Secretariat, is that we are trying now to provide an overview of national digital skills initiative in Europe and per member state or per discipline, to identify the gaps and overlaps and to see these national strategies, where are the gaps and overlaps with EOSC. So we want to analyze them and to provide insights on how we can best position EOSC in these national strategies and agenda. And of course, have well-rounded recommendations for policymakers, because data and ICT and EOSC now, it's something that we feel that it crosses research, government, industry, and public. So what we need to see is, how can we have, well-rounded recommendations for policymakers. The keywords here is inclusion of EOSC in the national strategy agenda, and sustainability, because these are being shaped now. I will go on to my next slide. Sustainability and funding is key for skills, reskilling, for upskilling, whatever we want to name it. Now, this LDK Consultants is a company through the EOS Secretariat, as I said. They're doing interviews in 9 countries. We went through a process of criteria and scoring each country based on four rough criteria. There is a sub-criteria, detailed sub-criteria in each of them. So how are digital economy, society, competitiveness, impact of ICT, readiness, and of course, geographical domain. And this is for us, this is very important, because first of all, we need to see when we talk about digital skills, where is the overlap with EOSC and the AI and perhaps HPC that countries are moving on. And what we want to do is to align EOSC with other initiatives from the European Commission. So the European Skills Agenda, there is a new digital education action plan from 21 to 27. There's this Digital Euro program, which will have 600 million euros for digital upskilling. And of course, it's what's happening at each country with a national coalition on digital skills. Fourth task force is about training catalog. So we know, and this is I think of relevance to our eyes, because we know that clusters are setting up, and research infrastructures and ERICs are setting up their own training catalogs. What we want to do is we want to see how we can align our not configurations, our technical specifications, our specifications on quality assurance. I wouldn't say certification here, so because I saw the Carol's and Nicholas comments. We would probably look into quality assurance, technical specifications, learning paths, because training catalog is not just to offer a training material. We're talking here about reskilling people, and this reskilling means more advanced learning paths and how we can do these crossovers between what we are producing. This is work being done in collaboration with ESFRI EOSC 5 projects and RDA group. And we believe that this work should be taken up by the ESFRI EOSC 03 project as an implementation project. And then I would like to finish with the SRIA priorities. And if I have time, Yannis.
1 minute.
We have identified 4 SRIA priorities. So one is developing the next generation of open science professional. And of course, we don't believe that EOSC per se will develop these EOSC professionals, open science professionals, but how, what actions, what activities do we foresee in EOSC that we can facilitate this process? So we're talking about career paths, digital skills profiles, recognition, quality assurance, and all these digital competence centers alignment. We want, as a next priority, we want to bridge what is happening at education and higher education organizations with what we're doing in EOSC. So where do we intervene at the educational level? How we can align the curricula, for example, and how can we think of rewarding early career researchers for open science? Third priority is about building a trusted and long-lasting hub of learning materials and tooling. We know this is a very time-consuming and an effort requiring process. So what the key thing here is how we can all align together, and in order to make sure that our efforts are not lost along the way. And last but not least is that what we would like to see is that we would like that, through EOSC and the EOSC Association, we develop these leadership programs for policymakers, for research administrators, for people embedded in the right positions to bring this right mentality about skills and training and to be able to foresee what's happening in the future. So this is the work in a nutshell of what we're doing in.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalia. So we've concluded the 4 presentations, each one, exciting in its own right. And if you take them all together, we get a major overview of how the technology is developing and the people around the technology and the architecture and the data and rules and so on and so forth. We have a whole bunch of questions that you have asked. Juan and Jean-Francois have answered a whole bunch of them in written mode. Thank you very much to both of you. But I won't allow me to eat up a little bit of the break until the breakout sessions to answer 1 or maybe 2 of the questions orally. And I'll start with the most popular one by Andrew Treloar from Down Under. Oops, it was just answered, I guess. So it disappeared. Okay, the one that is unanswered is question for you, Natalia. It is great to see how many, can I have my video on, please? Well, the technology people should take care of this. And then to whoever responds, please give them video rights. So a question for Natalia. It is great to see so many kinds of actors considered in the skills portfolio, but why are the researcher skills being considered from a frame of reference that is discipline specific? If the grand vision for EOSC is about increasing interdisciplinarity and reuse of data across disciplines, interdisciplinarity is itself very challenging, a skill set unto itself. What say you?
Okay, that's a challenging question, Jennifer. I think researchers, there are skills that they need to learn about data, open science, about data stewardship, about data curation. when we look into the future is the ICT and software. But what we need to realize is that there are specificities in each discipline, and especially on how to apply open science. And what we know, what we have learned is that some of the disciplines, for example, SSH, I know you come from SSH also, is that the researchers are missing this basic training on how to do and what to use. So I think this is a key key element that we need to prioritize. And of course, interdisciplinarity, but should we look into educating researchers? And I'm not talking about the education at the university, I'm talking about training now. So get researchers and educate them in interdisciplinarity. It's about open science, and open science is interdisciplinary. So I'm not sure, if this is not covered.
Okay, so things to be thought of and by everyone concerned, interdisciplinary. But I absolutely agree personally, if I may, Jennifer point, interdisciplinarity is a skill set, and we have to change the how you, in universities and other fora how we address that. If I may go to the next Jennifer question. Also very to the point, I would be curious to hear what is being left out of the MV and what the roadmap is for filling in those gaps going forward. Jean-Francois or Francoise or anyone else who wants to take this one up? Short question, short answers. Anyone? Juan? What is left out of the MV?
This is a question for the architecture working group at this stage.
Probably, although, from the general, that's why.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Yes.
Okay, so I think, if I may, that the MV, we are now in a world where we need to use iterative approaches, right? So the goal at the moment is to build the MV, to get it used, to see what are the gaps, and to prioritize when we see in real life what are the gaps, which one we address first. Deciding today what are the gaps that MVE will have later is used to be called the waterfall approach, where you design the whole project or initiatives and so forth from A to Z before you start. We cannot do that. Nobody knows already, or it could be, we could have a debate, but I think it's too early to have that debate. So let's focus in making the MVE work, get scientists and other stakeholders use it, observe what works and what does not work, or what can be improved and what what can be improved, because we may have dreams that cannot be fulfilled, right? So we need to identify the needs that we can fulfill. Let's do that when we have deployed the MVE rather than planning today. So I apologize for this, answer, which may be different from expectations, but I believe that's the right answer.
Realistic. Thank you very much, Jean-Francois. So let me close this part of the session. We'll start up with the breakout sessions at 15 after. We have 6 breakout sessions. The FAIR+R data and services was very popular, so there will be 3 breakout sessions with this topic. And Francoise and Andy Getz and Ornella will be moderating these 3 FAIR+R breakout sessions. Jean-Francois and Natalia will be moderating the corresponding breakout sessions with the topic of their presentation. And Wolfram Hortzman will be moderating the rules of participation breakout session. So a nice break, and 15 after we start up again. the tech team will put us appropriately in the appropriate channel. Thank you very much for now. Bye-bye.